please welcome to the stage Peggy Johnson, as well as our moderator, Brian Heater. Thank you so much.
Exactly the level of enthusiasm I want out of the first crowd of the
Exactly.
day. Thanks for being here early. Thanks for joining us. Peggy, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Very excited. We have a lot to talk about and not a ton of time to talk about it. And I wanted to kick things off by talking about your beginning, your journey, your first days at Magic Leap. You went from what by all accounts was a very comfortable job at Microsoft. You moved over to this company that, let's say, wasn't in the greatest of shape when you came on. Why is the question?
You're not the first to ask that, Ryan, I'll tell you. I did have a fantastic job. I worked for probably one of the most iconic tech leaders ever, Satya Nadella at Microsoft. But I had a chance to see Magic Leap's technology 2 years earlier. I'd made a visit out there, and the previous CEO, Roni Abovitz, had showed me the technology, and I loved it. And I thought it was unbelievable, had never seen anything like it. And when I saw that he was stepping down, I very intentionally raised my hand, because at least from the outside looking in, I thought I could see them looking for that product market fit and running after several areas. By the way, very similar to just about any new technology. You get some fabulous new technology, and then you say, okay, how do I commercialize this? What is the use case? And my view was if they could narrow that focus, narrow it to enterprise, which I saw as the near-term use cases, and then within enterprise, just to a few use cases, training, 3D visualization, remote assistance, that was the way forward. And so that's what I did. I said, I want in, and jumped in.
So you didn't have any doubts? You must have had a few doubts when you came on.
You know, my only doubt was the employees had been through a lot. They had really gone through a lot. And I worried about them. There had been a large reduction in force several months before I got there. I think, you know, they weren't sure what the vision was. They loved the product. They still love the product. Very, very passionate about the technology. So I worried about them, and I would say my first 30 days were focused on them. What is it that they're seeing? What are the issues? Just kept my ear to the ground and settled the team, gave them a new direction and focus, and then off we went.
You talked about market fit. Obviously, that's a big part of the story. That's a big part of what you came on and shifted. But broadly speaking, what was going wrong? What wasn't working at the company when you came on?
So I think entering that market through the consumer door was tough, because consumer wants low cost. The price of the device was not low, and it was marketed inside of, at the time, AT&T stores next to an iPhone that was much more performant.
Yeah.
You know,
when the iPhone is a cheap option, you know,
yeah, you're like,
yeah,
you have a bar there.
Yeah.
There was no content ecosystem. The company was trying to build it. That's a tough thing to do from the ground up. And then just the form factor itself, when you think about it, the consumer, for them to wear something, it needs to be lightweight, it can't be hot and heavy, it needs to fill a void for them. And all of those things are gonna happen over time, but the entry point was just, I believe, the wrong one. Now, they were also looking and talking to enterprise companies, and there were many companies that bought Magic Leap 1 for enterprise use cases. That's where the energy was. So I said, we've got to follow that energy. Over time, we'll circle back to the consumer.
The content conversation is an interesting one because, I mean, consoles in general live and die by the content, obviously.
Right.
So you were attempting to do a lot of that in-house. This is a new technology. It's hard to bring people on and develop for it. So now that you've made this pivot into enterprise, are you still producing content inside?
We're not, but we do produce a couple of reference apps that we have made available to developers that can help highlight what the device can do. We have an app called Assist that shows off how you can be remotely assisted through something. So there's a machine in front of you, you were trained on it 2 years ago and you can't quite remember how to fix it and get it back online. You can put the device on and somebody else, an expert on another side of the world, can see what you see. Your hands are free to fix it, they can annotate it, that sort of thing. That is a use case that crosses a lot of industries. So we make that available as a reference app. Customers can use it and customize it how they like. But for the rest of the ecosystem, we have had a very focused, intentionally focused aim at devs in the enterprise space in those areas. So anybody doing 3D visualization on a PC, on a 2D PC, it's made much better if you can actually see it in front of your eyes, volumetrically see it. So those are the sorts of applications that we've pursued to come onto the Magic Leap platform.
So the company had experienced some layoffs, obviously very well funded. The press had started from a very good place and perhaps wasn't where you wanted it when you came on board. Day one, you started the company. What do you do?
So it was employees first. I had to settle the team. The next thing was changing the image. What I think got lost in the headlines is what that company had built almost all by itself. It was carrying the water of augmented reality for a decade.
It's very uncommon in hardware to do that.
Very uncommon. And I mean, it's not unlike, now that we all have walked through the Tesla story, it's not unlike what Elon Musk did, where he kind of built everything himself. He wanted to reinvent something. He built it all himself, felt like he would have more ability to pull levers on things. It's the same with the founder's vision. He had tried to get some of the operating systems to incorporate the elements of augmented reality, and they all said, yeah, we'll get to it. And so he said, I got to build my own operating system. And when it came to the optics, nobody was making these kind of optics. They're highly complex, very hard to make, very hard to manufacture. He built his own manufacturing facility in the USA, in South Florida. So we actually manufacture our device in South Florida. But it gives us such an advantage because the engineers sit on the second floor and the manufacturing facilities on the first floor. They just run downstairs. You want to fix something, they're not on a plane to another country. They just run downstairs.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great, especially, over the past few years, there have been all these supply chain constraints.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about moving everything over on a boat. But what does that do to the bottom line? Anything anybody was really talking about with the first device was how much it cost.
Right. So what it does to the bottom line is, well, right now we're positioned below the Apple Vision Pro. We make these things downstairs, So we know how to manufacture them at a very high yield rate. The yield rate on the optics is about 95%. So what comes in, the glass substrate comes in one end of the factory, and out the other end comes a piece of optical equipment that just works. We calibrate it, we've designed it, manufactured it, calibrated it, test it, all right there. So it does allow us a cost advantage, and that has been an advantage for us. The other thing is the factory that literally I inherited, because it was there when I picked up the reins 3 years ago, has allowed us to actually provide contract manufacturing for a couple of other companies in the industry as they enter the augmented reality space. So we can make these things, and we can make them pretty well. So we have taken advantage of that path as just another form of revenue for the company.
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned the Vision Pro as a benchmark.
Yeah.
But again, it's not like that came out and didn't get a lot of press about how expensive it was. Is the device where it should be in terms of price point? Is this something that as you scale, you're going to be able to bring down over time?
For the current technology, for the current use cases, absolutely, because we can show huge gains in, for instance, reduction of training costs by using this device to train on. So yes, for an enterprise use case, the cost is not out of range. I think for a consumer use case, it's tough. That's a price point that's tough. And so there has to be, that agility to bring that cost down, which I believe there is. It's very similar to mobile phones when they were large, when they first came out. Enterprises bought them because it saved them money. People didn't have to stop and find a parking spot and then a phone booth, right? It saved them time. Enterprises bought them. And as that use case broadened, more and more of the ecosystem comes in and the price comes down. The silicon gets further integrated. The batteries come down. The size comes down. Consumers want that now. It's when it was big, only handfuls of folks we know had them. But when it became something you put in your pocket, literally everybody has it. Same thing will happen with this technology. It's on the same trajectory.
Roughly what kind of timeline do you think we're looking at in terms of like real mainstream acceptance?
So I think it's still several years out. It's hard to predict because much of it is out of the hands of, I don't produce silicon. But as these enterprise use cases gain speed and momentum and customers, the energy will be there and we'll start to see further integration of the device, further incorporation of cost savings, volume savings, size savings that will bring it in line with what a consumer will wear all day long.
So let's talk about use cases. We've got 2 videos to show. If we could fire up the first one right now. This one is really interesting to me because obviously hospitals, surgeries, that's something that people have been talking about a lot. And so, with augmented reality. But there's a lot of regulatory hurdles you have to go through in order to actually get this in an operating room.
Yes, and we went through them. The device could be used as a training device outside of the operating room, but in order to take it into the operating room, you have thermal and electrical requirements that you have to meet. And so we worked hard to get the device certified. It's called 60601 certification on the device. Surgeons can now take it into the operating room. And in this particular use case with the company CentiR, it's a heart catheterization procedure that currently is done looking at a 2D screen, and the surgeon's hand is over here threading the catheter through the heart while they're looking at the 2D screen to guide them. Well, basically we're merging those things. The surgeon's hands are free, both hands are free. They have in front of their eyes an image of the volumetric, by the way, live beating heart. So that's the magic that CentiR does. Their software images the heart, and the catheter has a camera on it, and it's much more natural for the surgeon just to be looking at it that way. And actually, the patient is right there as well. And so it's safer, they're better able to navigate through the heart chambers to get the catheter in ahead of surgery. That is one use case, but there are a plethora of use cases that companies want to use it for, things like knee surgery, where you can overlay onto the actual physical knee of the patient in front of you the incision marks. At some point, likely taking away the need for the very expensive robotics machines that help guide the surgeon through their incision, and just relying on the digital lines that you can see, because we go down to the sub-millimeter. It's very, very precise, very accurate.
Yeah, on that note, you mentioned Tesla earlier. Obviously, building a self-driving car is different than building an AMR, autonomous mobile robot, in that if the self-piloting car, something doesn't go right, then people die. This is, to a certain extent, I suppose, similar, because we're talking about like life and death surgeries, millimeter or sub-millimeter accuracy. How do you ensure that something like this, that people are using to save lives, has the level of accuracy required?
So we couldn't have even offered this as a use case if we didn't have that kind of accuracy, where the digital overlay is on top of the physical patient down to that level. And it's why you don't see other forms of mixed reality in the operating room. So obviously virtual reality, you're fully occluded and a surgeon can't can't really do anything terribly accurate. It's a great training device. Then there's pass-through augmented reality, which is essentially a display in front of your eyes where there are cameras looking out that are imaging your real world, and you're actually seeing your real world through a display.
And frankly, every time I've tried it, it's not very good.
Yeah, and a couple of things wrong with it. It does make a certain portion of the population nauseous because you're tricking your eye into
But you don't want a surgeon.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
exactly. So again, other use cases it's fine for, but a surgeon, you can't have that. But it also is laggy, so you have a bit of a lag because you've got to take the image, you've got to package it up, render it back onto the display in front of your eyes, and there's a little bit of a lag there. And so for things like some of our public sector and defense applications, and for highly precise surgery, you don't want to have pass-through augmented reality. You want optical see-through.
You want an overlay on the real world.
Correct, yeah.
So let's show video number 2. So this is an ongoing partnership with Audi, is that right?
It is, yes.
So this is primarily, watching the video, it looks like this is primarily for prototyping.
Yeah, so their vision, this is their Actisphere concept car. It's a beautiful car. And it's very clean inside. The dashboard is super clean. And, there's something to say about what they've done where you can take away kind of the cognitive load of buttons and things everywhere and just put in front of the driver what is needed at the time. And so they've been testing out this ability to, using digital content, redesign the UI inside of a car. And they've been showing this off in their Actisphere concept car with the intent to eventually, make it part of the Audi line going forward. And it was the sort of innovation that, you really have to partner with, because we had to get them up to speed on what augmented reality could do for them in their vision, and they had to get us up to speed on what they were trying to do to reinvent the dashboard of a car. So it was a great partnership, and I think it really shows off the value of overlaying digital content, because you can bring it in or bring it out, and it really does reduce the cognitive load.
How many of these units of the Magic Leap 2 are actually out in the field right now?
So we haven't said the exact number. I guess the good news is we continue to have ongoing interest sales. People are coming, buying the device, working on their own prototyping, and eventually bringing it into their companies as, to deploy. And that has been very gratifying. There's been no drop-off of interest. And I have to say, it has been a help to have others join the augmented reality.
We'll talk about that in a minute.
Between Meta, and Apple, it's been wonderful, to tell you the truth. That raises all boats.
Okay, how about this? Have you sold more of the 2 than the 1?
I don't think I can answer that.
Give me a thumbs up or thumbs down.
I'm not going to do it.
Okay, all right. So obviously Vision
I'm
Pro.
encouraged by our sales, I'll tell you that.
I'll ask you backstage.
Okay.
Obviously, the Vision Pro is the elephant in the room right now. I assume that you and the rest of the team, like the rest of us, were watching the WWDC presentation.
Every minute.
Yeah. Initial impressions?
First, I think it validates what Magic Leap was doing. I mean, here's our Magic Leap 2 device. It's our 2nd gen. They thought a lot about the human factors and the fact that this needs to be worn for hours if it's going to be useful. It can't be hot and heavy, can't be bugging your nose.
Especially when we're talking about spatial computing.
Correct, yeah, where you're walking around. And so they have a separate compute pack, as we do, so very validating there. They thought a lot about the design of the headset and keeping it comfortable. Ours is super lightweight, about 250 grams, about like a set of Bose over-the-ear headsets. So that's something you can wear for long periods as you can this device. So those were the sorts of things that I think, made us feel like, on the journey that we've been on, they saw the value of what Magic Leap had developed. They also have a number of sensors, outward-facing cameras, inward-facing cameras, that can help gather information that you can combine in a way to make really useful applications. So a lot of what I've seen, at least in what has been revealed so far, seems very similar to what we've built.
Okay, so have you tried the Vision Pro yet?
No.
Okay, so again, kind of backseat quarterbacking at watching the footage of it and reading all the stories. Is there anything they're getting wrong with the device?
Well, I think pass-through video is a step along the way to true augmented reality, and that's what they've done. They've built a device that has pass-through video. So it won't handle some of the use cases that we do. So maybe their next gen will. I would say that they've got a great ecosystem, which makes it easier for them to enter in the consumer market because they had an existing ecosystem of applications that they can bring over, something that didn't exist when Magic Leap built their first device with no content.
They've been building hardware for 40 years.
Exactly. So they can ride on that, and I think that'll be helpful. I will say, obviously they're iOS, we're Android-based. As consumer developers develop for that platform, it will bring more consumer interest and applications to the Android platform. So again, another huge positive to have them in the market.
You talked a little bit of overlap in terms of potential users. Do you think their audience approach is the right one? You're very much focused on these sorts of applications.
Yeah.
Apple showed a little bit of that, but it seems like spatial computing is the main thing.
Yeah, I think we're both in the spatial computing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Would you say that that's the primary use case, though?
Well, it was hard to say. Again, we all saw the same.
Sure. Yeah, I'm just saying they lean really heavily into spatial computing.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a great device because 4K display for entertainment, and they've got a great deal with Disney, so that all aligns very well. But as far as spatial computing, the ability to interact with digital content overlaid in your physical world, I think is the real end game, because that is going to bring us back to a heads-up world. Like right now, I remember I was in the mobile phone industry going back to my Qualcomm days, and I remember thinking, people aren't going to type into these little screens. How can that be? And of course, we're all doing that, and we're looking down. These devices give you back your real world, and you'll have a heads-up view of your real world. And by the way, you can decide what you want to see and what you don't want to see. Again, that idea about cognitive load. Sometimes our phones are just so much information at once. You can block those things and just say, right now, all I need to do is get to my next meeting, show me where to go. And so the idea of spatial computing is, I think, the real holy grail, if you will. That is where our phones someday, I think, will be obsolete, and we'll all be wearing glasses or even contacts that give us this capability.
So, Corinne, when she gave the intro, mentioned that the first video is from 2014, which I did a double take at, so almost 10 years at this point. Obviously, as you said, early days, we're developing all these sorts of proprietary technologies. Do partnerships make sense in terms of working not just with content providers, but also hardware companies?
They do make sense, particularly for a standalone company like us. All we do is augmented reality. So we're not selling cloud or games or advertising. We just do augmented reality. So we don't have other forms of revenue except this. So yes, partnerships make sense. I needed an ecosystem. That was the first thing after the employees that I said to the team, we have to take charge of not building from the ground up an ecosystem, but how do we engage an ecosystem to develop for our platform? And it doesn't have to be everybody all at once today, just in these areas, these apps that architectural apps, engineering and construction apps that you want to visualize things in 3D, let's go to those first, show them how much better it can be on our platform.
I mean, beyond content, though, licensing hardware. Would you, for example, license hardware to Meta, for example?
We would definitely license hardware if there wasn't a conflict in what we're trying to do. We would license, we have an amazing patent pool that has been developed ever since 2014, all up and down the chain across manufacturing, processes, power management, optics, from one end of the spectrum to the other, testing these things. So there's a lot of value right there. There's a lot of value in our manufacturing capacity and capability. So all of these are opportunities for us in a world where we aren't the ecosystem provider. We want to be able to partner with those out there. So we can provide them value, they can provide us value.
We are unfortunately out of time, so I'm going to ask you a yes or no question real quick. Have you had these conversations with Meta?
I am not going to answer.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Should I leave that there?
I think we'll take it.